Traveling to Consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome back to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. As always, I'm your host, Clayton Cuteri, and in today's podcast, we have a whole lot of news. A lot has happened since the last podcast episode. We have Justin Trudeau resigning as PM of Canada. Well, in a little bit. Trump wants to buy a couple countries and bring them together. He wants to rename a body of water, which I think is pretty wild. And then we also have some investment in America. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about nature and how nature is fighting back against those who wish to do her harm. So let's jump into all of this. Let's click a little preview of what we got in store for you today. So starting off, Justin Trudeau resigns as the Prime Minister of Canada. He will be technically still the Prime Minister until his party holds an election within their party to nominate someone to put them forth, so that then they would run against Pierre Poilievre. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, who would be considered their opposition. So I think it's interesting. I think it's very fascinating that we're seeing that unfold. It seems like a lot is going on right now. I don't know if you guys are paying attention to the energies of how these things are unfolding, but it seems like a lot is going on. And we're going to get into that as we go through this list. But I also find it very fascinating that this comes on the heels of Trump talking about how he wants to buy Canada. And it feels even more real. When Trump initially said it, everyone thought it was a joke. But hopefully, if you remember the podcast, I said, I think he actually is going to do it. Now we have people talking about how Canada is going to become the 51st state in a move that I think is very interesting. I'm going to stand here and say, I support it. I think I support that. I support the idea of expanding the greatest country in the world because it still will be its own sovereign state. Of course, there will be some federal laws that get applied to it. And honestly, the most important one being free speech. Because I don't know if you remember, but Justin Trudeau targeted the working class. The people he's supposed to represent. He targeted them whenever you had the truck drivers protesting all the mandates. And then the money got seized. The government of Canada seized a lot of the funds and donations that were going to these truck drivers to support them, and they seized it. They started banning stuff. You can find court cases where in Canada they made it essentially imprisonable by misgendering someone, which that's for a whole nother podcast. But the idea of free speech not being free, and I think that as just a cornerstone should be something that's spread across the world, and it does not exist in majority of countries. And speaking of the expansion of the United States, Trump wants Denmark to relinquish control of Greenland. Trump claimed that it's for economic and security purposes, and looking at it, again, I'm inclined to agree with him. The dude isn't 100%. I've kind of gone down this, and maybe it's a whole podcast for itself, but I probably agree with Trump on maybe 65 to 75% of his agenda. I think some of it doesn't include enough people, if that makes sense. I think that there are groups that are left out or marginalized. But if you take a step back and, but that's that's a whole podcast. That's another whole podcast on its own that I need to do a little bit more research on, just so I can have my facts straight. But just from gut instinct, where I'm at now, I'm probably aligned with Trump, maybe 70%. I'll say 65 to 75%. I'd have to go through all of his talking points and kind of say where I disagree. Because I think he says a lot of things that are interesting, but goes about them the wrong way, which creates a different framing of the conversation. But to the task at hand, he wants to take control of Greenland, make Greenland maybe the 52nd state. Again, something that I back. I support that, honestly. I think that, there's 55,000 people, I think, that live in Greenland. I think that, it's a very powerful location if you want to talk about it from a national security perspective. If you want to talk about it from an economic purpose, it got developed, it's pretty developed as is, but if it got more developed, if we sent more people to live there, it's very beautiful. I've seen pictures. It's a very beautiful country. And something I want to briefly mention here, I'm going to talk about it a little bit at the end, but I want to be very clear that even though I'm for the expansion of the United States, I believe the most important thing is that the people want it. The people of Canada want it. The people of Greenland want it. The people of any country that we expand into have to desire it. So I think that's like really a big question. Maybe it's a vote. Probably should get put up to a vote at some point in that country. Hey, do you want to join America? The people vote on it, say yes, no. If they say yes, maybe it's super majority, maybe it's 50%. I don't know. We could get into the details later, but the point is that the people of that country have to want to join the United States. I don't think that this can be a top-down thing. I think it's fine if Trump wants to say, hey, I think they should join. What do the people think? It seems a little bit more aggressive, as in like, we're just going to do it, which I think that would be a big mistake. I think that the people of these countries have to say, yes, we're tired of our government. We like the way the United States is governed. Let's go with them. So I want to be very clear about that before we get into this a little bit more. And I'll bring that up again, I'm sure, because I think that's like the most important thing whenever we're talking about the expansion of the United States, is that the people have to want it. It's not about whether or not it makes sense from a economic or national security perspective. That does not matter. If the people do not want it, if it is not a desire by the will of the people who live in that country, then it should not be done. And so, getting back to our news, Trump was saying that he wanted Denmark to relinquish control of Greenland. And it was kind of funny because it triggered a response from Germany and France, where some of their government officials were warning against this. And the reason I say it's funny is because they, like, America is their army. They talked about how, like, oh, NATO this, NATO that. It's like America is NATO. I don't think maybe this was just posturing, but the amount of money that gets dumped into the American military, and not that it should be that amount. I definitely think that number needs to come down. That's a whole nother conversation whenever we talk about NATO. But the amount of people, the amount of money, the amount of technology that Germany and France has combined compared to the United States is tiny. It is very tiny. So it's like, it's like a little kid coming up to an adult and saying, hey, you're being mean. I'm going to fight you. I'm going to punch you. It's like, okay, like, it's kind of cute. It's like, all right. Like, it's like, what are you going to do? Like, so I just thought that was a funny kind of little like asterisk here of them kind of trying to like say they'll do something. But, I don't know. That's a very actually interesting. I'd have to look at how NATO is set up, because I don't think that, I should look at, let me pull that up. Member countries of NATO, because I don't remember if Denmark is a member state. Let's see here. Okay, yeah, so Denmark is a NATO state, and I guess they have control of Greenland. So I'd have to look a little bit more into like how the legal nature is there, but I think that's interesting that you now have interfighting within NATO, which NATO, in my opinion, should have been disbanded years ago, because the whole purpose of NATO was to prevent the spread of communism from the USSR, which the USSR, the Soviets, no longer exist. Yes, Russia's there, but they're no longer communists. And so NATO should effectively be disbanded. Instead, we have our presidents saying that we need to expand, and that expansion is actually what has triggered more wars between, essentially proxy wars between the United States and Russia. That's the reason for the Ukraine war. It's 100%. You have Kamala Harris, who went and basically said to Zelensky, hey, we want you to join NATO, when Ukraine isn't even like a potential NATO country, because they're not a democracy, which is like the founding principle. They're not a capitalist society, which is a founding principle of what it means to be a NATO country. So first of all, they're not even allowed to join. But Kamala decided to have the big brains and go over there and say, hey, you guys should join. 3 days later, Russia invaded because Russia kept telling them, stop expanding NATO, stop expanding NATO. So it's like they literally are telling you, hey, we're going to go to war if you keep doing this. And we're like, haha, okay, we want war. Not we, but, obviously Kamala wants war. Otherwise, she wouldn't expand NATO. And that goes for all these other countries that joined essentially after like 1949. There was a few that got in there, and some of them I think got strong-armed, and some of them aren't like that prevalent, if you will, of countries. But, you keep tapping on their door, places like Poland. You keep tapping on the door of Russia, and they're going to be like, oh, okay, well, maybe we should invade so they take us seriously. And I'm not condoning it. I think it's wrong, but it's like, stop throwing stones, okay? We got to come together. We got to come together as a one people. And that also goes into why I support this expansion of the United States, is because we do have to come together. We have to become unified. We have to become united. So if that's under the United States of America, maybe there will be a name change there in the future, the United States of the world, we can be united. We no longer have enemies, right? There is no more Russia. There is no more Israel. There is no more Ukraine. So who's going to fight who? We have all been now unified. So to me, I see that as the path forward. I see that the path forward to world peace. I see that the path forward to salvation, prosperity. The key is that we have to have leaders in charge who care about the common people, who care about the next generation, who want people to be better than they were. That's the most important thing right there. And this goes into even the next country, the 53rd state of America, which seems to be Mexico. Trump's now targeting Mexico, telling them about the caravans, making claims about, I think he actually talked about invading Mexico, which, again, I am very much against. I think that's a very bad idea. Maybe it's just posturing, so that could be a good negotiation tactic. But I would be very much against actually invading Mexico. But look, at the same time, you say that, and if they don't do anything, then push comes to shove. But I think, end of the day, the people have to want it. The people of Mexico have to want to become a part of the United States of America. And I think it's possible. I mean, look, they're basically run by cartels, so it's definitely a step up. You just have to make sure that they have fair elections whenever voting. And then something I kind of found funny today, speaking of Mexico, Trump decided that we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which I find very funny just because, I mean, it's an interesting point. I'd have to look up the history of naming. Maybe we can do that right now. History of the name of the Gulf of Mexico. That's a lot of. But the point I'm trying to make here is like, it shares as much border with America. So why not? Oh, and look at this. There's an article that already popped up, getting populated about it. Why was the Gulf of Mexico given its name, and can Trump change it? Donald Trump is reportedly considering, what do you mean reportedly? He literally says in this thing that he's doing it. Considering another bold idea, map of Western Hemisphere, the announcement. Why was the Gulf of Mexico given its name? The Gulf of Mexico is shared primarily by the U.S. and Mexico, which have long controlled and utilized its waters. The name Mexico originates from an indigenous city that bore the same name as the modern state of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico has carried this name for roughly 400 years. However, in the U.S., it is often colloquially called the Third Coast due to its coastline spanning 5 southeastern states. Mexicans refer to the Gulf of Mexico as El Golfo de Mexico. El Golfo de Mexico. I hope I'm saying that right with a Spanish accent. Probably messed that up a little bit using the Spanish version. While the U.S. claims control over a significant portion of the Gulf, international agreements have clarified territorial waters. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, U.S. waters extend 12 nautical miles from its coastline. Despite multiple nations sharing the Gulf, including Cuba, Mr. Trump recently asserted that the U.S. does, quote, most of the work there. He argued the body of water should bear America's name because, quote, it's ours, end quote, adding that, quote, the American name has a beautiful ring, end quote. Yeah, I mean, I agree that the Gulf of America is kind of, I mean, it sounds a little weird because we've always been saying Gulf of Mexico. I'm not really crazy about the idea of him saying it's ours. That could be taken out of context because it is just like a straight up quote. Always got to be careful about that. But I don't know. To me, I'm not like for or against it. I think words are very powerful. I do think there's a lot of power in words. So it's interesting. It's definitely interesting to see this expansion mindset coming from Donald Trump. Not something that he campaigned on at all. Clearly something that he's very interested in doing in this term, in this election, or in his upcoming term. And honestly, as long as we're not using force, I'm for it. If the people want it, why not? Can Trump actually change the name, the Gulf of Mexico? His comments have ignited questions about whether a president can rename an international body of water. While a name change is theoretically possible, such a decision cannot be made unilaterally, and other nations are not obliged to recognize it. The U.S. and Mexico are members of the International Hydrographic Organization, IHO, which oversees the uniform charting and naming of the world's seas, oceans, and navigable water. Navigable. That's like able to navigate. In practice, countries sometimes refer to the same body of water or landmark by different names in their own documentation, but official changes require broader international consensus. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's always been very pro Trump, said that as soon as President Trump made the announcement, she told her staff to start drafting a bill. So it's interesting. That's power. I mean, I'm not crazy about her. I think she has a lot of good points. I should be nice. I think she has like some good things, some bad things, like we all do. And we just all need to learn to come together at the end of the day. So I don't know. I think it's interesting to see how this plays out. I guess I'm not really for or against Gulf of America, but with that being said, if in the future we are all going to become the United States of America, at some point, I guess it would become the Gulf of America because there would no longer be a country of Mexico. So I think it's interesting. In other news, slight topic shift, we have a $20 billion investment into America from a Middle Eastern billionaire. He wants to build data centers, I think reaching about 5 or 7 states, which is great for business. I mean, I remember talking to someone about, someone at one of my businesses. We were talking about like who I wanted to be president, and I was like, obviously the American Congress Party president, Rachel Fiore, our presidential candidate. She was like, well, yeah, no, but like if you had to pick Kamala or Trump, like which one? And my answer, I gave like a little bit of an answer, but the thing I said about Trump is at least like the pro is that the mindset of businessmen and entrepreneurs will be like increased so that we can at least get our economy back on track. And I've talked about this on past podcasts. I think the debt that we are accruing as a nation is absolutely absurd, and I don't know if it's fixable. I don't think it's fixable. I think it's just headed towards a complete collapse, and we need to do our best to, rise up from when those ashes hit. We'll get to those ashes in a second. But I bring this up because this is a highlight. There was a Japanese company that invested $200 billion into America, and now we have a $20 billion investment from a Middle Eastern guy. So it seems like that was accurate. But speaking of ashes and nature, this is also an important thing we need to discuss here. Nature is getting crazy, guys. Nature is getting crazy. Nature decided to start fighting back against all these people who have been poisoning it. If you look to Southern California right now, there are 4 fires, which is insane, the number of fires that are going on. And it's absolute devastation. It's absolute devastation. My brother lives out in Venice Beach. He's had all these crazy photos. Luckily, it's blowing the opposite direction away from him. But just insanity out there. It looks like apocalyptic is like the best word I could give you for it. It's so crazy. And then on top of that, there was also a snowstorm maybe 3 or 4 days ago that just ripped through the southern states of America. Absolutely bonkers, absolutely crazy. And I know things like this can bring with them a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. And I just want to put out there that be aware that those who serve nature will always be taken care of. If you're serving nature, if you're trying to do better, if you're serving it, if you're saying, hey, I'm here, show me the path, she's going to take care of you. I promise you that. And when I say that, I want to make sure that it doesn't mean that all of the people who are affected or are being affected are anti-nature. Not at all. Because you never know how these things will play out. If there's someone who is anti-nature, then nature is going to give them hell. No pun intended. I mean, that place looks like hell. But actually give them hell, their insurance company might not do stuff. It'll give them a whole lot of problems. However, if you are someone who supports nature, if your house got into this burned, destroyed, what will happen is maybe the insurance company comes through for you. It gives you more money than you needed. You're going to rebuild bigger and better. You have friends to go to. You have a whole support system because nature has been planning this. She's in charge, guys. With all of this fear stuff, just know that those who serve nature will always be taken care of. So just keep serving nature, however you do it. I don't know how you do it. One way you do it could be by sharing this podcast so that people are more aware of that serving nature serves nature. So that would be a very powerful way to do it. I also would appreciate it if you did that so we can get this out to more people. I really hope you guys enjoyed the podcast, but really enjoyed and really hope you guys find a way to serve nature. Something I do every day is I'll throw, what will I do every day? Kind of rub your hands in grass. I've talked about this before, but if you literally just rub your hands in grass and tell nature hey, I need more money. Hey, help me with my relationship. Hey, give me more charisma. Give me this. Nature will find a way. It might not seem like it at first. Sometimes it does. I've told some people to do that, and within a day they get $800 that they were not expecting. Some people have to go for it a week, and then it kind of then it'll come in. It all just depends on where you're at in life, what you're asking for. So go do that. That's actually very powerful. Rub your hands in grass. If you don't have anything, ask nature how you could best serve her. Say, hey, what could I do better? How am I able to serve you better? Because we got to save her. She's the supreme, right? So with all that being said, I appreciate you all. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Traveling to Consciousness. Oh, last update. I will be going to Phoenix for the next week. I am going for our digital marketing agency, meeting with clients, trying to recruit some clients. So if you live in Phoenix, maybe we can meet up. If you don't live in Phoenix, that's also totally cool. Know that I have a digital marketing agency going on in the background, create websites, blog, SEO, email marketing, all that jazz. Let me know. We can set up a consultation, shoot me an email, reply to this, text me, DM me on Instagram, whatever it is. And let's get your business up and running. We have very affordable but very effective pricing. We're really looking for companies who are just helping nature, helping other people. Maybe you give back to the community in some way. Maybe you have a vision that's bigger than you, stuff like that. So that's another way that you could utilize everything. So I appreciate you guys. I hope you guys have an amazing day, an amazing week in the event that I do not get out a podcast on Monday. I'm going to do my best, I promise. And then even the next Thursday, I'm going to do my best, I promise, even if they're just short ones. So I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And I will talk to all of you guys in the 6th dimension.